reiterate my thanks to you, Jay, and to you, Mary, for the organization of this whole series. It really has been good to learn, to hear other perspectives, and to meet each other in this common ground. Um, I want to thank Buff Grace. I want to thank Rena Turnham, who have been real supporters and mentors in the work that the task force has done. This first slide, I hope you can see it all right, lists the current people who are on the task force. And this is by no means exclusive. There are others that have been a little less active, and everyone is welcome that's interested and wants to try to make a difference. So I noticed that a number of the folks on the team are here tonight. So thanks for being here. The goals for this session are, following up on what Jay just said. The preceding sessions have provided a theological basis for the fifth mark of mission that we're talking about. Old and New Testament grounding has been provided, and some interesting thoughts on the indigenous spirituality and their approach that the earth gives us life, and that we have a responsibility then to accepting that gift and all of the many things that the earth gives us, to maintain it. And we've come away with a thirst for action to fulfill our calling. And I like to use Presiding Bishop Michael Curry's Creation Care Pledge to guide us, and we'll be doing that this evening. This is what I'm doing up front is just basically a 30,000-foot overview of who the Climate Justice Task Force is and what we've been up to. And then the second half of the meeting, I hope we can have a good, fruitful discussion with all of us for possibilities of incorporating climate justice into a broader range of our actions, both individually and as a cathedral. The Creation Care Pledge, you know it. We will share our stories of love and concern for the earth and link with others who care about protecting the earth, the sacred web of life. This is the formation process that we've been going through. Liberating, we will stand with those most vulnerable to the harmful effects of environmental degradation and climate change: women, children, poor people, and communities of color, refugees, and migrants. This is our advocacy work. And life-giving, we will change our habits and choices in order to live more simply, humbly, and gently on the earth. So this is personal action. The Climate Justice Task Force was commissioned by Dean Paul in 2019 to help us all discern actions, loving, liberating, and life-giving, that we can take. And working with MNIPL, the Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, we developed a plan for doing that and became a certified congregation. We've implemented our initial plan, and we're growing our efforts for 2021 and beyond. This slide is an eye chart, and you don't need to read it. We'll be talking about it, and I'll give some examples of it shortly. But the thing I want to point out is that we looked at practical, systemic, and spiritual goals, and these are very much directly the life-giving, liberating, and loving goals that Bishop Curry laid out. So there's a beautiful fit between what the National Episcopal Church is doing and advocating and setting forth as a template, and that from MNIPL, which frankly was the inspiration to get all of this started. We We began way back in 2019. One of the first things we did was hold a climate theology workshop that Buff led. And he was talking about Project Drawdown, which you mentioned in his recent talk last week. And if you haven't looked at that website, there are half a dozen, or actually there's more than that because there's seminars beneath that, that are really, really great, and talking about the opportunities for us to do things to make a difference and what that process looks like. Drawdown is when we reach a point where we can uh, reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. And we hope that we're all working to achieve that time soon. We've talked with our youth, and we got their input very early on in terms of goals, and we incorporated those into our plan. And this again is part of our formation process, and they became part of our plan. We would love to have youth members, more of them, uh, as part of our committee, but I think we look too white-haired for this group. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do is have activities and events like tree planting or other things that will attract youth and that they can become a part of us in that way. We've advocated for the clean cars rulemaking. There were a group of 6 or 7 of us. There's one picture that we took at the time at one of the initial clean cars information sessions. We've continued to advocate and lobby for that. And just this past Friday, the administrative law judge ruled that the clean cars rules that have been put together and the process to do all of the public hearings and the due diligence were successful, and that we're able to move ahead legally now to implement the clean cars. As you probably read in the news, there's a little bit of pushback from that's political and partisan, which is unfortunate. But the MPCA now has the legal authority to implement these rules, which would put us in alignment with California, the rules in California. And one of the results of that will be more EVs that can be sold in Minnesota. We've been involved in advocacy in other ways. Here's the audio coming through a recent Line 3 rally that we attended in March, and found some other Episcopal Church folks participating in that as well. We've been to several climate action days at the Minnesota Capitol. Here's some of the first people who were involved with that a year or so ago. Steve Gove has been really instrumental and has attended a couple more of those. And I know Ann and Russ attended the virtual rallies and others, I think, where we actually met with our legislators. We had, and I guess Ann and Russ hosted this. How do we live lighter on the earth? What are some of the personal things that we can do? We invited the parish, Ann and Russ did, to join an energy party at the cathedral to see the options for solar, both putting your own solar up and for solar gardens and other kinds of things. We had a couple of vendors present, and MNIPL was present. More on that. Recently, Dana Dixon has been advocating for a Restore the Earth effort. And one of the first events that he organized was a partnership with the North Minneapolis group called Family of Trees. And we had quite a reasonable number of us come out last month, and we planted, I don't know, a whole bunch of pine trees. And Dana can tell you more about that, but it's just really heartening to work on these things. One thing that we're happy to be able to have been acknowledged for, as part of our outreach, we proposed expanding our reach to other Episcopal churches within ECMN. and to have other climate justice task forces commissioned and organized at other Episcopal churches. And we applied for and were awarded a seed grant last year from the National Episcopal Church's Creation Care Initiative. And we're implementing that seed grant. Buff Grace is actually leading that. And it's resulted in 5 new parishes that have joined this path that we're on. Excuse me. What are we doing for 2021? Well, we have 4 areas that we're focusing on. Continuing the legislative advocacy. Again, Ann and Russ led a group which put together a statement of priorities for the task force from St. Mark's to communicate to federal legislators, including the House of Representatives people from the federal. And we've had seminars with 4 or 5 of those as a way to do that. We have a quick response team, and Steve is leading that to quickly get messages out to everyone who's interested. And if you want to be, if you're not on that list and want to be, please touch base with Steve. And this will does announce events and opportunities to send letters to various folks in the state and national government and in the legislative process. And we're advocating for Stop Line 3. And we've joined the MNIPL efforts in that. It violates all of the treaty rights that have been established and running a gas pipeline or an oil pipeline across much of the north, and with great effects on environment, and the opportunity for spills there are significant. And further, it just moves a whole lot of oil out of the tar sands reservoirs that are in Canada that never should be burned at all. And so if we can advocate to prevent this, we'll prevent a whole lot of greenhouse gas emission. So it's still up in the air. The permits have been granted, but it's not a settled issue. There are lawsuits and so on that are proceeding. I mentioned the Restore the Earth that Dana has been leading. We're advocating for sustainable investing. And we had an initial meeting, asked, and were invited to go to the St. Mark's Foundation meeting in late March, and several of us on the team attended that meeting. We asked that they consider updating their policies for sustainable investing, for focusing on climate and social justice. And they have, Fred Moore has let me know that they've made a decision at their April meeting to provide much more direct and specific input directions to the investment advisors with a view towards improving the climate and social justice impacts of the investments that the cathedral directs. And finally, there's an intersectionality with immigration, housing, and racial justice that we want to talk a little bit more about. And so an initiative is, what action should we be taking to work there? Intersectionality, there's an interesting article that was presented by Bill McKibben, who's the head of the National 350 organization. I need to go backwards. The article is called When Crises Converge, and there is a reference to that, how you can reach it at the bottom of this screen. Basically, the essence of it is that fossil fuel mining, distribution, and use in power generation, transportation, agriculture, building heating systems, manufacturing, and others have caused global temperatures to rise to unprecedented levels. This is causing droughts, floods, crop failures, and wildfires. This is resulting in a scarcity of food, water, housing, and the creation and spreading of conflicts that are creating climate refugees, whom we now find on our doorstep, both in Europe and on our southern borders. And unfortunately, our response in the world has been to build walls, limit visas, separate children from families, and house them in cages. And our sense is we can do better than that. And tonight, I hope you will join us in helping to formulate some next steps that will aid in this process of loving, liberating, and life-giving. How will we share our stories of love and concern for the earth and link to others who care about protecting? How shall we stand with those most vulnerable to the harmful effects of environmental degradation, climate change, women, children, poor people, and communities of color? How and when will we change our habits and choices in order to live more simply, humbly, and gently on the earth? So as we move to the discussion sessions, what might we do? And this is just seed thoughts. I mean, what if the St. Mark's Council were to develop a cathedral action plan to respond to the intersectional climate crisis? What might be the actions? These are things we could consider for migration, racial justice, housing equity. What projects might we be able to do? Are there some things, and let's think out of box a little bit. There's no room or space or sunshine on the cathedral property. We don't have room, but if you look right across the street, the Walker Art Center is largely sunlit. What if there was a solar garden on top of the Walker Art Center that was there to benefit our low-income neighbors? And it was expressly built and designed so that the power would flow to those who really need it and don't have access otherwise. Or maybe it's another space that would not normally be viewed as available for solar panels. And just throw ideas out. So for the breakout, I'd ask that we do two things. First, just to get to know each other's stories a little bit better. We'll have small breakout groups. I think there's going to be about 4 or perhaps 5 in each breakout group. Give you a chance to briefly tell your own story of an action that you've taken for climate change. It doesn't have to be huge, but just think briefly of a story of what you might have been involved in. And then as a group, I've asked Mary to assign someone from our task force to take notes for each of the sessions. And the questions are, 1, how shall we as St. Markans stand with those most vulnerable to the harmful effects? How should we respond as a St. Mark's community? What aspects of this crisis are we well suited to? I mean, each of us has different gifts, capabilities, privileges, and personalities. We each bring something a little different, but what are the things that we can do as a community to address this? And to ask you to think out of box. So with that, Mary, I would say let's move to the sessions. If you have some that you have in mind and can do, that would be great. And then when we come back, I'll take some notes, and each of those people, note takers from the Climate Justice Task Force, if you could write down ideas, we'll have a meeting in a couple of weeks and try to digest them, but briefly share them with everyone tonight when we come back.